January 3rd, 2013. The gentleman from California, Mr. Peters, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the chance to hold this special order with some of my freshman colleagues. And I ask unanimous consent that members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. I heard some of the discussion from yesterday and even some tonight, and thought that it would be appropriate for some of the freshmen who just got here, don't have some of the perspective that has pervaded some of the discussion, haven't been here for a lot of the most bitter battles, maybe have a little bit more of a problem-solving attitude, to give our perspective on some of these things, and maybe to have a constructive discussion of the government shutdown and also the debt ceiling, which I think is a very, very serious thing to discuss as part of a normal or as part of a negotiation. The news today in San Diego will be about the cancellation of the Miramar air show that was to take place this weekend. This is a great tradition for our community, an important fundraiser for military families, and really a sad casualty of the current shutdown. But I'd like to start my comments by highlighting a more hidden and much more serious effect of the shutdown just by sharing a couple emails I received from constituents in the last 3 days. First, I'm an engineer that has supported the Navy and Marine Corps for 26 years and have always given 100% to ensure that our military has the best capabilities in the world. Most of the people I work with have gone above and beyond to give the Navy and USMC our very best, especially during the many years of wartime. Due to sequestration and previous furloughs, I've already lost $10,000 of income this year and completely depleted my family's savings account. Now I'm being furloughed again, and this follows 3 years of frozen pay. I'm worried for my wife and 2 young children because I cannot pay the bills if this shutdown continues. I do not blame one party or the other. I'm sure they both think they are doing the right thing, but I worry that they do not know the pain they are causing for the families of dedicated and hardworking civil servants. A second one. I'm writing to you today concerning our government shutdown. I am an active duty spouse of 15 years with 2 children. We recently moved to Coronado from Naples, Italy. I have made several sacrifices over the years to follow my husband's career. I've always felt that my husband's job as an officer in the United States Navy was worthy of my sacrifices. I have stood proud by his side. We have moved 11 times within our 15 years of service, and as always, we have budgeted our housing allowance, cost of living, and pay. And today, as I read all the negative comments on social media threads, I feel as though I have wasted 15 years of my life. I almost fell off the treadmill on the base gym this morning when it hit me. All of the holidays my husband has missed, the birthdays and the anniversaries spent alone, for what reason? For 535 of you to shut us down? Thank God I did not fall off the treadmill this morning, as now our medical staff is on furlough and the area is severely understaffed. Finally, I'm a proud American, and that's why I proudly work at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego. As a nurse practitioner with Department of Surgery, I have already endured 1 furlough. This resulted in a 20% pay reduction this summer, and I was grateful it ended earlier than planned. But now I'm furloughed with a 100% loss in pay. It has to stop. As a San Diego resident, I know you are aware that your mortgages are higher than most. I'm also a single mother of 2 wonderful girls. This makes the additional furlough that much harder to swallow. Please work with your fellow representatives to make this government shutdown end as soon as possible. It's hurting the average American much more than D.C. seems to understand. If our elected officials were forced to take a 20% pay reduction and have that followed by a 100% pay loss, I'm sure the budget would be fixed. I just want to continue to do my job and would appreciate being allowed to do just that. If this continues further, I'll be forced to seek other employment. My faith in our government is failing quickly. Again, please work together to end this situation. There's stories like that from all these federal workers, and more than 800,000 federal workers are out of work during the government shutdown. And it's not just the D.C. metro area that's affected, as you've heard. From Hawaii to Georgia, workers in regions all over the country rely heavily on the federal government, And San Diego is the seventh ranked city with high share of federal employees. We have 151,000 workers. 10.9% of our workforce is affected by this government shutdown. Obviously, the same is true in Colorado Springs, which is number 1, Virginia Beach, Honolulu, the D.C. region, Ogden, Clearfield, Utah, El Paso, Augusta, Georgia, San Antonio, and Charleston. Every one of those places has thousands of stories just like the ones I've told. So it is important for us in D.C. To remember the effect that we're having in the real world. And that's often been the biggest surprise for me, is that when I leave my district and I've heard these stories and I come here and we hear that people are talking in these terms of blame and calling each other names and not really doing credit to this institution and far from solving the problems that have gotten us here. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, we don't want to shut the government down. Well, we don't have to. I've heard a lot of finger pointing about who caused it. But the fact is that today, the power to reopen this government rests solely within the House of Representatives. We know what we have to do. We don't have to wait for the Senate. We don't have to wait for the President. We can pass a continuing resolution, which is the instrument that funds the government, only for 6 weeks or 10 weeks, that the Senate has passed. We don't have to have any amendments or anything. We do that today. We can at least do it tomorrow. And all these people will be back to work, and we can end these stories of fear and pain that are affecting our families and the businesses that they work for. Now, there's been a lot of yelling about attaching conditions to the continuing resolution. We've been voting on these really literally for weeks now, and I'm not going to add my voice to those, but I'll just say that it seems that those have run their course. None of them has gotten anywhere. I myself supported some of these conditions. In fact, earlier this year, I voted to delay the individual mandate to match the business mandate. That wasn't something that was popular in my party. I voted for that. But in the context of this continuing resolution, I supported the repeal of the medical device tax. It happens also to be one of my major legislative priorities. I think that's a bad way to fund any part of the government. But that got some Democratic votes, but it didn't get any support in the Senate. Today we got an email from the majority leader who said that House Republicans believe it's critical we continue to engage and offer meaningful solutions for the American people, which is why he said, on a bipartisan basis, with a total of 57 different Democrats voting with us, we have passed bills to reopen the NIH, ensure that the National Guard and reservists are paid, fund veterans' benefits, reopen our national parks, allow the District of Columbia to expend their local funds. I voted for all these too. Most of my party didn't, but I thought we had one chance to provide these, to open these areas up, to make sure that they go back to work. It's not the best budgeting thing. I voted for them, but the point is they went nowhere. The Senate will not approve them, and if the Senate approved them, the President wouldn't sign them. So it's time to recognize that we have reached the end of this road, and this is not getting us anywhere. We know that these things won't sell. We know that they won't get support in the Senate, and it's time to move on to a basic continuing resolution without amendments. Now, I've heard people say, some of my colleagues on the other side say, well, we need to get something. And I just point out that if you look at the numbers, and we all talk extensively about the need in general to control spending and lower our debt, the Senate approved spending until November at the Republican level. President Obama's budget proposal was for $1.2 trillion. The Senate's budget was for $1.06 trillion, or about $0.2 trillion less. And the Senate approved a spending level at the continuing resolution at an annual rate of $986 billion. That's a cut of $72 billion from the Senate budget. That's a 7% less than the Senate had proposed, and $217 billion less than the President's proposed budget, 18%. So to say that you needed to get something, I think certainly that at this point the Republicans have won the war over discretionary spending. Now, that's not a war that people are going to give up on, but in the continuing resolution, which we're asking to vote on, to have a chance to vote on in the House, the Republicans' number was the number used. At this time, I'd like to yield to my colleague from the state of Washington, Derek Kilmer, serves with me on the Armed Services Committee and also on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the good gentleman from California for organizing this time. You know, far and away, the most common thing said to me over the last year has been, dear God, why on earth would you want to be in Congress? Particularly when you have two little kids and Congress is such a mess. And I'll tell you, at every occasion I've responded the same way. It's because I got two little kids and Congress is a mess. I actually care about what kind of country they grow up in. And I think if people who think that this is okay sit on the sidelines, we're never going to fix it. I'll tell you, it is strange to join an organization that, according to recent polling information, is held in lower regard than head lice. And having only been here for about 9 months, I've got a pretty good sense of why. You know, when I got here, Congress was in the process of enacting this policy of sequestration, across-the-board cuts, which have had dramatic impacts in my neck of the woods, where you've seen workers furloughed, cuts to critical agencies and critical services. In Kitsap County, where I serve, they've ended mental health outreach to senior citizens because of sequestration. We've seen impacts to our region's largest employer, the United States Navy. We've seen impact after impact. And if that wasn't enough, we've gone beyond, we all remember the fiscal cliff. We're out now at like the fiscal mountain range, where we go from self-imposed crisis to self-imposed crisis. First it was sequestration. Then it was a government shutdown. And coming up next is the possibility that our nation defaults on its financial obligations. Unfortunately, Congress is earning the low regard in which citizens currently hold it. Let me talk a little bit about the shutdown and how it affects the folks that I represent. You've heard a lot about furloughs. I've got, in my district, 3,500 workers at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard who are now on furlough. Just outside of my district, we've got Joint Base Lewis McChord. 10,000 workers have been furloughed. The largest land base in my district is Olympic National Park, which is an extraordinary tourist destination, which is now closed for business. 103 workers at Olympic National Park out on furlough. But it's actually not just the impact to the federal workforce that should concern us. It's the impact to the private economy. Before I came here, I spent my professional career working in economic development. I spent 10 years working in economic development in Tacoma, Washington. I'm concerned, for example, that you're seeing a delay in the issuance of Small Business Administration loans because of a government shutdown. I'm concerned that this shutdown is at a cost to taxpayers of $150 million to $300 million a day. But primarily I'm concerned that as you've seen Congress govern from crisis to crisis, that we've fissured the one thing that more than anything businesses want from government. In the 10 years I worked in economic development, the thing I heard more often from employers than anything else was that they looked to government for an environment of trust and predictability. I think Congress has completely messed that up. I will tell you, I don't think it has to be like this. In fact, I came out of a reasonably functional state legislature. The last 3 bills we passed in the Washington State Senate before I left were a balanced budget, a debt reduction proposal, and a jobs bill. And of the 49 members of the Washington State Senate, the balanced budget passed with all but 2 votes. The debt reduction proposal passed with all but 7 votes, and the jobs bill passed with all but 1. And it was largely because we worked together. We didn't define success as making the other side of the aisle look like failures. And I think, frankly, given the challenges facing our country, that gig ought to be up. We should be leading by example. We ought to be working together. We should be solving problems together. I am certainly, as one of 435, trying to do that. It means, for example, when the government shut down and the people who I represent are no longer drawing a paycheck, I'm not either. It's why I supported a bill that many of us supported that was known as No Budget, No Pay. that says if Congress can't pass a budget, members of Congress shouldn't get paid. You know, when I served in the legislature, I knocked on 52,000 doors. The biggest change in recent years was that people were home because they were out of work. You know, I talked to parents who were concerned that our community's largest export was going to be our kids. And the vast majority of people I talk to actually do not give a rip about whether we get more Democratic or more Republican or move more to the left or more to the right. They just want us to stop moving backwards and start moving forward again. So in the brief minute I have remaining, let me talk about what I think forward ought to look like. Forward ought to look like reopening the government. End this government shutdown now. It should mean taking action to make sure our nation doesn't default on its financial obligations. An act that would ensure that costs go up for our small businesses, costs go up for our families, and everyone's retirement goes down. It means working together to ensure that we actually pass a budget. And that's actually going to take Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate to work together to pass a budget. When we went through freshman orientation, we're all freshmen up here. When we went through freshman orientation, there was a presentation on how the budget process works. And the way it works is the House passes the budget, the Senate passes the budget, then it goes to conference. And then the House passes appropriation bills, the Senate passes appropriations bills, and then they go to conference to compromise. And after about 40 minutes of presenting that, they then said, well, that hasn't happened, though, in years. Well, it ought to happen. We should get that back on track. We should get this country back on track. We also need to focus on the economy. I spent a decade working in economic development. We had a sign up on the wall in our office that said, we are competing with everyone, everywhere, every day, forever. If we think our competitor nations are participating in the frivolity that our government is currently participating in, we have another thing coming. China in the last decade has doubled its number of higher education institutions. They've multiplied fivefold their number of students in colleges and universities on top of the 200,000 students that are studying abroad, primarily in fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. And what are we doing? Here we sit with a government shutdown, impeding our economic recovery, hurting our businesses in this nation. We can't afford this. We should stop this. We need to get people back to work. But, Madam Speaker, we need to get this Congress back to work, too. And that's why all of us, as freshman members here, are here. We want to get this country moving forward again. And I yield back my time.
Thank you. And to thank the gentleman, I'd say you talked about how we define success. And I know you and I have spoken, as have many members, about how we can get away with what we call success here. So what happens is what's happened in this context, too, is a number of things will be proposed, and they won't go anywhere. And then what will happen is a bunch of finger pointing will come after. Well, I proposed this, I voted for it, I voted against it. Imagine if you were a CEO of a company that made a product, and you said, I created a great product, I think you really like it, and it sounds great to the CEO, and the CEO says, wow, that sounds terrific, and how many did you sell? Well, I didn't sell any, but they really should buy it. And that's what Congress is doing. That's kind of how we define success around here. Well, I stuck them with a good bill, even though no one's going to vote for it. But of course, in business or in your family, you'd actually have to listen to what the other side wanted if you wanted to reach a result that was a success. That's what success would be. And I thank you for pointing that out. I would also say on no budget, no pay, which I also supported. The concept that if Congress doesn't do its job, we shouldn't get a paycheck. We were proud that day when we worked together with our Republican colleagues. We passed no budget, no pay, forced the Senate, controlled by Democrats, to pass the first budget that they passed in 4 years. But that's all well and good unless we actually talk together. And I saw a picture this week of Mr. Cantor and some of his colleagues waiting at a table for people to come have a conference. But we've been waiting for that all year on this budget. And we came in good faith and tried to pass no budget, no pay. Wouldn't it be good if we had used this time, or we could use the next few weeks to sit down and actually hammer out a budget through that process? And this is a time to do it. And I'll just, before I turn it over to another colleague, I'll just mention, remind my colleagues of the report from the Washington Post last December, regarding President Obama's budget proposal back then, in which it said, for the first time he is formally proposing to trim Social Security benefits, a GOP demand that is anathema to many Democrats. He is also offering to make meaningful reductions in Medicare benefits, including higher premiums for couples making more than $170,000 a year. And he visited each of the caucuses earlier this year and told the House Democrats, by the way, you can't take $3 out of Medicare for every dollar you put in. And he said that our corporate tax rates were too high for our companies to compete internationally. This has been going on all year, ladies and gentlemen, with no effort to negotiate at all, because it's the leadership of the Speaker here who won't appoint conferees, because apparently they're concerned about getting that. So we've waited till this moment of crisis to talk about something that you and I have been waiting for all year. With that, I'd like to yield some time to my colleague from New Hampshire, Ms. Kuster.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague from California, Mr. Peters, for the opportunity this evening to talk about civility, to talk about coming together and finding common ground, and most importantly, to talk about getting things done. You know, I first ran for Congress because our Congress here, our government, was mired in dysfunction, and I truly felt that our country needs our help. And I want to say that I believe my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, who are new members of Congress, including the gentlelady in the chair, share that concern. We have found common ground on a number of issues. I was very proud to work with another fresh woman, Ms. Walorski, to pass a bill unanimously in this House to help victims of medical sexual trauma. And we came together, we got 110 bipartisan sponsors. So I know that what we bring to this august body is the ability to find common ground. Then, as now, my goal is to bring people together. These are common sense solutions. My colleague, Mr. Peters, has just reiterated discussions that have been going on in various rooms in this building, from the White House to Capitol Hill, throughout this year, about entitlement reform, about tax reform, about controlling spending, but most importantly about providing the services that people across this country need from our government. You know, I come from New Hampshire, the Granite State. We're frugal people. And New Hampshire families don't need more bickering in Washington. They need real solutions to grow the economy, foster job creation, and expand opportunity for the middle class. That's what they sent me here to do. You know, one of my staffers said to me today, after the week we've just had, you can't fix the roof when it's pouring out by plugging just a few holes. We've got to come together and solve the whole problem. And I, for one, know that we can do it. I know that we actually have the votes in this body right now to come together and take that vote, a bipartisan vote, to get the country and our government opening again. You know, honestly, Granite State families don't expect Congress to agree on everything. We don't. We have significant differences. Some of them are religious, some of them are political, some of them come from our backgrounds and our life experiences. We have real disagreements on issues of significant importance to our country, but they do expect us to work together when we can find areas of agreement. We cannot have cooperation without open dialogue. That's what we're asking for here tonight. Civility, a common theme, coming together, and creating dialogue, especially now. This is the moment we ran for Congress for. Our government is lurching from crisis to crisis, and what the American people expect and need from their leaders is to come together and find that common ground, work across the aisle, break the gridlock, end the shutdown, take this bipartisan vote, and restore services for the people we represent and get our country and government working again. We won't get this done solely with Democratic ideas or Republican ideas. Frankly, I don't care if an idea is proposed by a Republican or a Democrat. If it's a common sense solution to the problems we face, let's support it. In New Hampshire, here's how we get things done. I've been making calls all week back to my district as we've been here voting to find out what is the impact of the federal government shutdown and what can I do to help. So I've talked to mayors all across my district. Let me tell you, these are real people's real lives, and it's going to cause serious pain. I called a town, small town, up north near the Canadian border. It was a paper mill town. They've lost thousands of jobs in this community. And I asked the mayor, what is it that's happening on the ground there? He started to tell me about a woman who works for the United States Department of Agriculture. And what she does is help with rural economic development. She helps with small business loans. And he said, she's not at work. She's been furloughed. And there are 8 small business applications sitting on her desk. Now, this is a small town. 8 small businesses in this town that won't get those loans and can't create new jobs. That's a problem. And then he said, because this is the kind of person he is and this is the kind of town it is, he said, and she's a single mom without a paycheck. And he wanted me to know that. Then I talked with mayors of big cities and smaller towns. I talked to businesses. I want to understand what's the impact on the business community. Now, I've talked to lots of federal employees this week, and I've talked to their unions, and I have tremendous compassion for the folks who have been sent home. But I want my colleagues across the aisle to understand the impact on our economy. So today I was talking to large employers. These are government contractors. They're vendors. They build things, and they provide services for our military, for IT, for everything that we use in this country to keep us safe and to keep us strong. And they said thousands of jobs will be lost. Thousands. And if you read the headlines today, we've already lost thousands. And finally, I spoke with our governor. And I want to close with this because I know that with civility and trust and mutual respect, we can resolve these tired partisan battles, and we can renew our focus on what really matters: fostering job creation, making smart spending cuts, taking responsibility to reduce the deficit, encourage innovation, grow the economy, grow opportunity for the middle class. And with a little more civility in the halls of Congress, I'm confident that we can resolve this crisis and redouble our focus on our shared priorities. So let me close with this. Our governor, Maggie Hassan, said to me, Annie, tell them how we get this done in New Hampshire. We have a Democratic governor and a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. Sounds familiar. It's a little bit twisted from what we have here in Washington, but it's the same effect. It's a divided government. But in New Hampshire, we don't see it as a divided government. We see it as an opportunity to reach across the aisle and to bring people together and find common ground. And she said, remind them that we have just passed a budget in New Hampshire that was unanimous in the Republican Senate, virtually unanimous in the Democratic House, signed by the Democratic governor, and most importantly for all here in Washington, it was a balanced budget. The revenues and the expenditures were equal. So that's what I'm talking about here today. Come together and have the discussion about how to get our fiscal house in order, how to create jobs, how to provide opportunity. And finally, I'm going to close with a phone call that I got this week, Scott, that made a tremendous difference to my perspective on this. It was a crackly line coming into my office. A young intern answered the phone, and when she could finally understand the speaker on the other end of the line, he said, "This is Joe. I'm calling from Afghanistan." He's a soldier in Afghanistan. He's there to serve our country. And he said, I am here working hard for my family and my country, and I want you to do the same. The message that Joe had for me is that he wants affordable, accessible health care for his family and for families all across New Hampshire and all across this country. And he said, do not give up on that, but you have got to open this government. People need the help that they deserve. Our economy needs the strength and the vitality. We can't leave thousands of people without their jobs, without their pay. And I ask you, Mr. Speaker, please bring this vote to the floor. We can pass this with a bipartisan vote, and we can move our country forward. And with that, I yield back, and I thank the gentleman from California for giving us the opportunity. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady from New Hampshire. And again, you're absolutely right. All we have to do to get this started again is to put the Senate resolution before this House. We could vote on that tomorrow, and the government would be open immediately thereafter. And I think, obviously, that's what we would all like to do. I'd now like to yield time to my friend, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank my good friend from California, Mr. Peters, for organizing this important discussion this evening and reminding all Americans how important it is to end this ridiculous and disgraceful shutdown we're in right now. The damage this manufactured crisis is causing is unacceptable. I've heard daily from hundreds of my constituents who have already felt the pain from this shutdown over the past 4 days. They all express the same sentiment: enough already. And I share this frustration. I received a letter today from a local Navy veteran, and it particularly stood out to me. And I just want to share a brief part of this story that I read. I'm a recently discharged veteran of the U.S. Navy. During the 5 years I served, I was told continually that when I left the service behind, I would be taken care of, and I believed that implicitly. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. Since I was discharged over 2 months ago, I've struggled to get unemployment and find work. I'm currently receiving VA disability for service-connected injuries, or at least I was before the government shut down yesterday. I rely on my disability to survive, and now I don't even know when the next payment will arrive. To complicate matters further, I've attempted to start up school and use my GI benefits, only to find out that the VA will run out of money by the end of this month if the shutdown continues. So no more disability or education benefits, benefits I've earned, benefits I got for sacrificing 5 of the best years of my life for. So essentially, I paid into this program, made sacrifices too numerous to count, was deployed around the world twice in support of the global war on terrorism, and now I come to find out that all of that amounts to nothing. This shutdown has negatively impacted my life more than I ever thought possible. The mere fact that veterans' benefits were even on the table as part of this shutdown is an outrage in itself. Have we not done enough? What more do I need to sacrifice? We have a hard enough time surviving overseas, and this is the treatment we come home to. Our own government shutting down and unable to take care of us. I plan on applying for food stamps soon. I never dreamed my life would come to this, especially after serving my country. But hey, I guess that's what our government has come to. Please do whatever it takes to end this shutdown. Well, Joshua, I never dreamed it would come to this either, that our nation would be willing to break its promise to the brave men and women like you over partisan games. I called Joshua today to let him know that I too am appalled, and that I am here fighting for him alongside my colleagues, alongside our nation's veterans, seniors, and all Americans who have had enough of the shutdown, enough of the games, enough of these manufactured crises. That is why I'm leading efforts urging leadership to immediately vote on reopening the government. Our fragile economy cannot afford one more day of this disgraceful shutdown, and neither can veterans such as Joshua. I urge the House to pass a clean spending bill immediately and put an end to this nonsensical shutdown. Thank you.
Thank you, gentleman from Florida. I guess it's cold comfort to Joshua to hear that the House has been voting on these piecemeal approaches. And I'm not saying that they were ill-motivated, because many of us supported them, but they're not working. So it's time for us to learn the lesson, I believe, and I agree with you. Put the Senate resolution on here and open this government back up, and we can do our work in Congress that we were sent to do, that we're paid to do, without stopping the government. And I think those comments are very well put, and I thank the gentleman.
Thank you.
You know, the other thing we heard about, in addition to we need to get something or we need to sit down and talk, is the idea that we have to repeal or do away with the health care law. And I would just say this about being a freshman. You know, we weren't here for these votes. None of us cast a vote either way on the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. But we heard a lot of questions about it, and we took those questions. We took them very seriously, and most of us said, you know, we should try to fix them. But we're also realistic. We've seen that the health care law was passed by Congress a few years ago, signed by the President. It was okayed by the Supreme Court, and it survived a number of additional repeal votes here in the House of Representatives. So it appears that it's here to be with us to stay. It's been rolling out with mixed reports this week, but I think in many places people are finding hope that they can get affordable health care. Clearly we have more work to do, and I stand here willing to help fix the Affordable Care Act to the extent we need it. I've expressed my own concern about the medical device tax. I think that's something that should be repealed. There's other, the Cadillac tax. I think we should provide new incentives for wellness. I think we should get out of the way of technology and encourage technology as an approach to lower costs. And I'm willing to get to work on that. But that's not going to be, you know, if that law took a long, long time to pass, it was very contentious, those problems won't be solved to the satisfaction of the Congress or to the completion of the task within the time we're talking about while shutting the government down. So let's get to work and let's not hold the government up for that. And my final observation about this shutdown is that I'm reminded of when I practiced law and I tried cases, and I liked having a case with a good lawyer on the other side, because a good lawyer knew where he or she was going, and you could tell kind of what the strategy was and where you're going to end up. And I feel in this case like I'm trying a case against a lawyer who's really inexperienced or doesn't know what he's doing, in the sense that I can't figure out where they're going. So we're hoping that if there is some resolution that can happen, we'd love to be a part of it. But I think it starts with passing the continuing resolution that the Senate passed and getting this government open right now. And I'd like to close with a few comments on the other issue that we haven't gotten to, but that I think concerns me greatly, and that's the debt ceiling. Now, it's one thing to argue over the continuing resolution. We've been talking about that and shutting down the government, and that's a bad thing. It's something I hope will end soon, and as I said before, it's something that's entirely within our power to do without the help of the Senate or the President. We just vote for that resolution that the Senate passed, the government would be open tomorrow. But I hear talk about the debt ceiling as though it's the same thing, and it is not. The debt ceiling is a dangerous, dangerous tactic for negotiation. It's bad business, it's bad economics, and it's bad government. At first I'd start by talking about what it's like to do business in this way. And it occurs to me that my parents must be asking themselves about the people who would play with the debt ceiling. Who raised these people? What we're doing here with the debt ceiling, talking about not paying our debts, it's like getting the credit card bill, opening it up and seeing how much you bought, and deciding at that point, well, no, I've got to control spending. I don't want to pay this. But that's too late to have the discussion. And I remember my parents, my father's a minister, my mom stayed home, worked part-time to help us with college. I have vivid memories of them laying out the bills on the dining room table to make sure they could figure out their cash flow, how were they going to pay each bill, what day of the month each bill was due. And they made every payment, because they always taught me about making sure you kept good credit. We know now about credit scores and how important it is to be on time, and families all over the country understand that kind of approach. For us to take this approach that we are not going to pay the debts that we've incurred is just the wrong way to do business. But it's really terrible economics. The Treasury reported this week: with the government likely to exhaust its cash reserves around October 17th, the Treasury said being forced into non-payment of any of its obligations, and in particular its debt, would spark turmoil in the financial markets and possibly send the country back into a recession as deep as that of 2008 to 2009. And we know we've been coming out of that, but very slowly. We don't want to go back there. In the event, it continues, that a debt limit impasse were to lead to a default, it could have a catastrophic effect on not just financial markets, but also on job creation, consumer spending, and economic growth. Credit markets could freeze, the value of the dollar could plummet, U.S. interest rates could skyrocket, the negative spillovers could reverberate around the world, and there might be a financial crisis and recession that could echo the events of 2008 or worse. This is not some political statement. This is what we're hearing from the Wall Street Journal, from the banking community, from the financial sector. They are saying, stay away from this. CNN Money said, forget the current government shutdown. Economists say it's the upcoming debt ceiling impasse that could plunge the nation into a recession. About half of the 22 economists surveyed by CNN Money say a recession will be unavoidable if Congress fails to raise the nation's debt ceiling before the Treasury runs out of cash later this month. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's not get to that point. Mr. Speaker, we cannot mess with the debt ceiling. The government shutdown is bad enough. We're kind of playing around the edges. I urge that we put the Senate resolution before the House so we can vote on it, open this government tomorrow. But let us not play with the notion, let us not suggest to anyone that America won't pay the debts it's incurred. Finally, from an article called After the Shutdown, posted by James Surowiecki, I just offer this. And he's speaking in partisan terms, but anyone who thinks this, I think it applies to. This is why the Republican approach to the debt ceiling is not, as people like Zeke Miller of Time have argued, the kind of hostage-taking that's a standard way of doing business in Washington. This is really an attempt to remake the legislative process itself, and to do so by threatening to do something, default, that no one, including the people making the threat, believes to be in the best interest of the United States. We can't be sure of exactly what would happen if the U.S. stopped paying its bills, but at the very least it would lead to havoc in the bond market and the financial system, which depends on U.S. Treasuries as risk-free collateral, higher interest rates, and an immediate hit to economic growth. It's not a road that anyone should want to go down, and Mr. Speaker, in my view, it's not a road we should even be considering going down. And so as bad as the continuing resolution is and the fight over the shutdown, I know that just behind us is a much more dangerous prospect, and I wanted to warn of that. Finally, just to suggest to folks that I have offered 2 bills that would provide an alternative and would help us deal with the national debt. And they would work very simply like this. When debt was declining as a percentage of the economy, which means we have it under control, the debt ceiling would adjust without a vote, payments would go out. And when debt started to increase as a percentage of the economy, which means we're not having it under control, we all understand that long-term debt can't continue to rise as a percentage of the economy without hurting our economic future. But in that case, we needed a mechanism to do something more than just yell at each other and call each other names, which I know the freshmen that were with me tonight are still amazed that that's what happens here, but that's what happens way too often. We need a mechanism to force a discussion of really how to manage the debt. And our bill would provide that if we are in the condition where debt's rising as a percentage of GDP, and the President and the leaders of Congress didn't do anything about it, which is a condition we find ourselves in today, then individual members, Mr. Speaker, would be able to propose their own measures without the blessing of leadership, but with the sponsorship of only 50 of their colleagues, to force a discussion on how to manage that debt and get it under control. That's just one idea, but at this point, I think it's the only idea on the table to actually avoid this in a constructive way. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the chance to offer some thoughts on these issues with my colleagues, and with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.